What's happening, people? Welcome to this week's episode of It's All Blakademik with your host, myself, Jordan Jarrett-Bryan. On the show this week, we're going to be having a discussion on something that I wanted to talk about for a little while on the show. It's a discussion around death, loss, and grieving, and more specifically, how as a black community, we deal with all three. And I've got three really great guests with me that hopefully will add some great value and context to this discussion. First of all, I'm joined by Diane Bryan, who's Integrative and Bereavement Counsellor for Adults, Children and Adolescents. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. The author of The Darker Side to Ghana, Kofi Ali, I've invited you on because I want you to really break down. I'm interested to know how the different African countries and the tribes within those countries differentiate in terms of how they deal with death and passing as well. And thirdly, I'm joined by Dr. Marilyn Allen, who's a specialist in therapeutic counselling and lifestyle practice. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Thank you all for joining me on this subject here today. Now, obviously, this is such a sensitive discussion. I think we can all relate in terms of we've all have lost someone close to us at some point. So I'm very, very aware of the sensitivities of this discussion, but I think it's a very important one to be having. I'm going to start with you, Diane. Just kick us off with talking about why it's so important to have a healthy grieving process.
To be honest, it's very important because grief is actually a natural process of life. It's actually quite a natural thing. And we are not sort of prepared nowadays, well, really in life, for death. It's something we don't really often talk about. And when it happens, we tend to go into shock, which is natural. We can deny. It's also recognized now as a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. If the grief is not healthy, it can lead to often sort of the most worst emotional conditions ever. It can lead to addictions. It brings out attachment disorders. And to be honest, it's quite natural. It's one of those things where you have to allow someone to go through this emotional turmoil, anger, allow them to feel depressed and low sometimes, and until they learn to sort of accept the loss of this person, which is something we all have to go through at some point, in some stage in our life.
Indeed. And Kofi, do you see any kind of significant differences in how, I suppose, the black people, we will get to kind of, digging down on the different types of black people that there are, but black people generally and white people in the West and here in Europe deal with the death of a loved one?
Indeed, death is, like Dan said, part of our life. However, death is dealt with from different perspectives. Different cultures have different approach, and death is not about an individual, it's about a group in most cases. However, it depends upon the nature, the structure of the culture. And given the fact that a lot of those who are now becoming part of the British family, which I say British family, a lot are actually migrants. So when there is bereavement, it's about what is done here and what is done elsewhere. And in this context, you will then see that if you actually live here, the way you deal with this issue is a bit different, in the sense that in this society, the definition of a family, most cases, is a person, the partner, and the children. Mm-hmm. And therefore, grief is around that. Again, then comes in the issue of religion of the individual, and then the social class. That then will say that it will be bigger or smaller. Now, as the person is grieving here, elsewhere, the context of family is beyond the individual. Therefore, the loss is not to that person, but to a huge family that has their own plan. Some cases, they will say, the body should be delayed. In some other cases, they say, no, let's bury the body. Because at the time, the body is still with you as the one that has lost someone. It could be a child, it could be a partner, it could be, parents. At that time, as long as the body is with you, there's that tension. You only want to do away with the body, in other words, with dignity that we all deserve. That's what you want to do. And when the body is taken away, you have relief. However, some cultures tend to say that, okay, they want to even take the body from the UK to where the person probably migrated from, because to them, the body belonged to the bigger family.
I want to pick up a bit more in terms of the continent of Africa and how you guys, the different countries deal with death in the different ways. I'm really intrigued by that. I want to speak to yourself, Dr. Marilyn, about how death can manifest itself, or not dealing with death can manifest itself in terms of mental health, and how not processing that in a healthy way, what that can lead to later on in life. So if you experience a death at a very young age, it can be a friend, it can be a relative, or anybody. If you don't process that correctly, how that can 10, 20, 30 years later be really bad for you psychologically.
Okay, so death will occur in everybody's family. It's the guaranteed thing for everybody. Nobody lives forever. So everybody's going to experience bereavement and grief through death, loss. The way people tend to deal with grief and loss is through attachment. We have different types of attachments. We have secure attachment, ambivalent attachment. We also have avoidant attachment. And it's based on how you were brought up, how your caregiver brought you up. And so, for instance, if you have secure attachment, you have a lot of confidence. You're not scared to be in the world on your own. So if somebody who has secure attachment loses a person who's very close to them, from a very young age, they know how to be confident on their own. And so they're able to deal with being independent without the basic caregiver at any time. So whether as a child or as an adult, the inner working model is that I can cope with everything. And so whether as a teenager or an adult, you go back to your behavior pattern, which is hardwired in your brain, and then you go straight back into that, so you'll be able to cope better. Somebody who has ambivalent attachment, meaning that they weren't quite sure whether when they cried, mother came. They weren't quite sure whether mother was going to give them the love that they wanted or the validation they wanted, would hardwire that. And so throughout their life, they'll think, oh, am I sure I'm doing this right? There's a bit of hesitation in terms of confidence in all senses of the word in their life. Yeah. And so when there's a death, am I confident enough to show my grief? Are people going to criticize me? Is somebody going to blame me for crying too much? Is this the right time to show my grief? You're not very confident, you're hesitant. And so then perhaps you keep some of that inside. And then at some point, because it's unresolved, when something triggers that emotion in you, you just break down totally. Perhaps something very little doesn't deserve you breaking down completely, but you will, because you've gone back, it's activated the pain that you didn't express. And that can lead to blame, shame, addictions, bad relationships, and so on and so forth. Somebody who has avoidant attachment style will just sit there and not react to anything as a child, because maybe when they cried, nobody came. They had to find ways of coping on themselves. And unfortunately, there's some styles of raising children that say the child should be left on their own to cry, then fall asleep.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so in such a case, when the person is growing, they seem to think that they shouldn't react to anything, they should assess the situation, they shouldn't show emotion, because when they were a child, when they showed emotion, nobody came. Yeah. They've hardwired that. So when they grow older, and there's bereavement or grief or loss, whether it's death, whether it's of a relationship, whether it's financial loss, whether it's social loss, they tend to behave that way. They go straight back.
Well, I want to come back to the other forms of loss, because I think when people think of losing someone, they automatically think death. But you can grieve with someone that hasn't died, but is no longer with you to some degree.
Absolutely.
I'll come back to you now, Diane. the first time I understood that you were doing this work and you were qualified in this industry, in this area, was when you lost your son. And I only knew this because I only come across this because I remember being at the 9 night that you had and thinking to myself how incredibly, I don't know what the word is, calm you were. You were in inverted commas very just normal in your behavior. First of all, explain to people that don't know what a 9 night is, and secondly, what was your coping mechanism, or how did the work you do now enable you to be and deal with the situation that you dealt with? So what's a 9 night first of all?
Well, the 9 nights is the celebration of the death, which in all the years I've been going to 9 nights, I never quite understood why we have to celebrate this death, you know. And then when my son died, I kind of realized all of a sudden everybody came. You don't remember telling everybody that somebody's died, but the news seems to travel out. And it was a very soothing, supportive step process where everybody came, friends, family, everybody came in a loving capacity and supported us when we didn't even realize we needed supported.
And it's a very Jamaican thing.
It is a very, very sort of, Jamaican, Caribbean thing. I have a Jamaican background. And by the time the 9 nights came, there was meals, food, celebration. It was an actual celebration of life. And it was so nice to see so many people come, even my son's friends and people I never even knew that knew him. There was over 2,000 people at my son's funeral. And I didn't get to greet every one of them, but I never knew that we knew so many people. And it was really, really loving. At the end of the 9 nights, when everybody was gone, that was the actual time when the actual grieving process started to begin, to be totally honest, because you don't have time. And during the 9 nights, you're just through absolute denial and shock in reality. You're just functioning and just coping as you're going along without realizing you feel you're entertaining and keeping people going without realizing that everyone is actually supporting you. And at the end of the 9 nights, the energy drains and you are absolutely mentally and physically exhausted, and the realization comes of why everybody came to you. And then you realize, then you start going through the actual process of recognizing the loss. I understood it because I've been dealing with bereavement for 5 years. So I kind of understood the process of exactly what was going on. And the most intriguing thing for me was the actual searching process. And the searching process is when you will see your loved one in many things. And there were many triggers. Like, say, for example, at 7 o'clock he would come in, and, Emmanuel comes on at 7 o'clock. You would straight away, you would associate 7 o'clock, and you would feel this sort of sense of loss. And for me, it was, I was told my son died at 9:30. And at 9:30, no matter whatever happens, I always find myself looking at the clock. Even now, I don't even remember sometimes why I'm looking, but I'll find myself looking at 9:30 to sort of pick up, or my brain sort of recognizes that was the time when I was told my son left the earth.
Kofi, so that the 9 nights is a very Jamaican thing, something that we do where we do celebrate the passing of a loved one. There's lots of food, there's lots of talking, there's lots of jokes, and it's a very uplifting time of remembering the person that's passed. Talk to me a little bit about the different ways. So you're Ghanaian.
Yes.
Talk to me first of all about the different ways in which Ghanaians, how they handle death, grief, and loss.
Indeed.
And why they do what they do.
Why they do what they do. There are, how do I say, 2 things we are looking at here when you talk about bereavement. Sometimes it has to do with, like she said, a dependency. What are you losing? Now, what you are losing, like I said earlier, depends upon the society. Like we said, if a person is brought up to be independent, they tend to see the loss just as somebody's gone away. But then when you are not independent and you depend on that person, then there will be the challenges of what you get in return from that person. And this is where the British, or I'll say the European way of going about bereavement is a bit different from the West African way. In West Africa, we have so many tribes. In West Africa, most times it's about dependency. So what am I losing from that person who is no more? So anytime there is bereavement, you will see people going far, far into things like crying, wailing physically. And sometimes it's even interesting to have, they expect you to do it. So sometimes you can even go and rent people, pay them to come and cry on your behalf to show how much you have lost the dead person.
Almost professional criers.
We have them. They are well paid and they are good at it. And when, but again, it comes to the, like I said, the social class, the connection, how many people. To some people, sometimes it could be business.
So just going back to that, sorry, I'm interested in that. So why is it important to have that show that we have? Why do they do that?
It's all about how much important this person meant to me.
Okay, and the more people that turn out and show their grief, the more important that person was.
Yes, and then again, how much more, and that's the positive side. How far has he gone in touching these people's life? In other words, while he's alive, or while he was alive, the things he did. So they are all there to see that, oh man, this man is gone. We don't want him to be dead. We wish he's here, because when he's here, we'll be getting what we're going to be getting. It has its positive and negative side. The negative side is that sometimes individuals are forced in certain tradition that they will go to any extent to spend more than they have. So after the bereavement, after the whole incident, they will end up with huge debt, because they will have gone to part of showing that oh, he's a great man is renting, killing animals, taking over the whole town. Sometimes it's gone for weeks. And this is why in some cases they need to even have to delay the dead body, keep it in the fridge, preserve it for months so that people from far and wide will come. Most cases is for old people who are aged. And again, sorry, quickly, religion comes in here. The Muslims bury so quickly, 2-3 days, he's gone. They put him down. There is a post-mortem that is needed to be done, where the government, they take it quickly. In fact, sometimes the following day. So sometimes they don't spend much. But Ghana, Nigeria, and it's even going beyond, like Kenya and so on, you have people who really...
It's a big drawn out affair.
It's a big, big business. And at the end of the day, sometimes we even sit down. Kids are not going to school. The person who might have died may be a very, very poor person. Very, very. Nobody cares about that person while they're alive. But the time they die, the children now, who probably will have to show that, yes, we are, and our parents is a great person. Yeah. So what they then do is that they will get their own friends to come in now. Their friends are coming to contribute, actually.
Let me just point you there. You wanted to come in there.
I wanted to say, which you did ask in a sort of Caribbean concept, that mostly with the Caribbean, the origin of Nine Nights stemmed from slavery. And I mean, it also, after a while, it developed a spiritual reason for it. But it was a time when, as the revolutions arrived during slavery, there was a time when slaves would get time off. Once the person died, they can bury them at night time, and they would continue this celebration for as long as they got the time off when someone close to them died. And as time went on within the Caribbean culture, with our Nine Nights, everybody brings food. To this day, everyone brought what they had to celebrate and to acknowledge the death of this loved one. Now it's sort of changed a lot to, like what you were saying, the expenses of it. It's turned absolutely elaborate. But before, everyone, we still like would bring chicken, everyone would bring something. But really, it is, for the Caribbean, it is still basically based on a slavery thing of having time off to celebrate someone's death. And it sort of, as time went on, the spirituality of it was that when this person died, they were free from slavery. It meant they were liberated. This person has moved on. They're going into their homecoming. They're going up to heaven. Their time is done. And that was the spiritual concept of it.
I want to talk a little bit now about what I mentioned earlier on, the difference between someone dying and losing somebody. So talk to me a little bit about how losing a partner, losing a best friend, how that form of grief can manifest itself in somebody as well.
Okay, so when you form a relationship with somebody, the person is in your life you do things with them, you develop brain patterns, yeah, which again you hardwire. You've had a relationship with this person, you do things with them, they're in your life, you do things together, even business partners, even your employer, your teacher, your professor, the person who supplies you food constantly. Anybody, you form relationships, the world is full of relationships, and then there's a rupture in the relationship. Now, because you have cultivated this brain pattern of this person being in your life, when they go and they're not there anymore, you feel it. You have to feel it because it's a natural process. Again, going back to the attachment theory, the 3 attachment styles. If you're a secure person, you just see it as they came into your life, they've gone, you're very independent, you're strong in your emotions, they've served their time, they're gone. But if you have ambivalent or avoidant, it does affect you because is it a rejection thing? Is it a blame thing? Is it a shame thing? Are you being shamed because you've been dumped? Was it your fault? They find a way of blaming themselves, even though it's not their fault.
That's interesting because I've always I didn't think about grief when linked with losing someone that in that sense. So I find that personally quite interesting. Catherine Mannix wrote a book I've got here called With the End in Mind, and she says there are 2 days in our lives that are under 24 hours: the day you're born and the day you die. She makes the point that we spend so much time focusing on one day, the day you're born, but not enough on the day that you die. Is that something you would agree with as well? And if so, how do you focus on that final day?
Well, it depends in which context she means the last 24 hours of your death, because death manifests itself in so many ways. If you died when you were in hospital, having been in coma for a few years, how then do you account for the 24 hours?
Sure, yeah.
If you have a car accident, it wasn't planned, it's instant. How do you manage? Do you see what I mean? How do you account for that? So I don't know in what context she wrote that.
But do you think that we should be spending just as much time as the focus on when someone's born as I don't know how you plan these things. I kind of understood what she said, but didn't. I was wondering if you thought that there was a way of planning for when you pass.
I think that in European society we plan, so we have death insurance.
Yeah.
We have death insurance.
Yeah.
In Africa, in Ghana, where I come from, we used to, in the past, have so many children. Your children were insurance policy. Okay. So you had so many children, you brought them up in a way that they would have children, earn money, look after you whilst you were growing older. That was the guarantee that when you died, somebody was going to bury you.
Sure, yeah.
So for that reason, if you didn't have children, it was very difficult. And that's why people forced to have children, and if they couldn't have children, the wives would find a way of bringing a child.
Yeah.
So that it would mean that you were someone, you had done your deeds, and somebody was going to bury you.
I mean, faith and religion also plays a part in your preparation for death, to be honest. And religion often sort of serves as a reward process for that passing over, that great transition of when your time comes, you know. You do well, you go to heaven, you do bad, you know, and your conscience would sort of guide you along the way.
Having said that, I think it was Barry White who said that he was very close with his brother, and they had a little local deal that whomever went first would find a way of coming back and telling the other whether there was a heaven or a hell. And Barry said he waited and waited and waited, and his brother never came.
I told him.
So he doesn't know whether there's
a heaven or a hell.
But there we are, we just have to believe.
And we have death doulas. I didn't know about death doulas. For those that don't know, we have birth doulas. For people that don't know, those are people that support the woman in the process of giving birth. You actually have people who are professional death doulas as well. That I suppose the opposite, that support you on when you're maybe about to pass. Have you heard of this thing before?
Well, that is the job of a therapist.
Okay. Is that just a different word for the same thing?
It's the same thing. It's the job. It's just the name changes.
Okay.
But there are people who will look after you and try and prepare you. They're therapists for end of life.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the same thing. It's just a different name.
I'm trying to move it forward. I've got to wrap up quite soon, guys. But there are statutory rights for when you're a new parent. Do you think there should be statutory rights for when somebody close to you passes? So do you think it should be in law that if your wife, if your son, if your daughter passes, it's law that you have a certain period of time where you have off and you're not financially out of pocket?
Well, we do have that, don't we?
It's already there.
We have
I don't think it's
bereavement.
I don't think it's in law. Is it in law?
It's
It's
absolutely.
sure you do get time off
yeah.
for-
How long do you get? Do you know?
I think you get leave for 5 working days or
Yes.
some such thing.
Should it be more?
It is there.
It should be more.
It
Should
should
be
be
more?
more. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on
Okay,
that,
okay.
but there is, because I remember when my father passed away, I had to travel
it.
to Ghana.
Okay.
I was a university lecturer then, and I was given leave to go home. It's called bereavement leave or something.
You do, there are some-
Yeah, I don't remember how long it was, but you do get that. If you're employed, you should get that.
Yeah.
Like you get maternity leave or sick leave, yes. It might not be enough because bereavement hasn't got a set time
Sure, of
within
course, yeah.
which you have to grieve and
Yes,
then come
yeah.
back to work. So you will come back to work and you will still be in the state of grief, but you do get a little time.
Go on.
The little addition to that is what you mentioned, the financial support as well. That when you get that day, I think it's 7 days or something like that, but you are not financially supported. And it's very important. Although I think some councils have a way of going about the financial aspect. They do help the family for example, burial, how do you want to be buried, and so on and so forth. They do give that assistance.
Can I just say something? And it's might take us off the subject a bit, but sometimes with children, because grief is such a personal thing, bereavement is such a personal thing, no one can manage anybody else's grief, and everyone's grieving styles is based on their life experiences, and often children get missed out or left out on this, and adolescence is quite a crucial time of brain rewiring. With the present violence that we're going through nowadays, a lot of children are experiencing people who are passing in traumatic death experiences, sudden death experiences. And expected to go to school the week after, expected to carry on, as normal. And they are forming. And one of the main things in the grief stages of grief is often anger, which can sometimes cause revenge. And it is just
Delayed reactions.
And delayed reactions, and I just wanted to point out that it should be recognized and noted in schools probably.
Yeah.
So on that as well, do you think that dealing with death should be taught in schools? Is it the school's job, or is it the parents' job in the home? Who should be teaching young people about, at some point, you're going to lose someone that's close to you that you love?
I think in society we have a mass denial of death, especially in the Western culture. We tend to just live for life, and life
When
is
it happens,
value
it
on
happens.
it happens, and that's exactly it, But this is something that we all is natural human right to die. Is whether you like it or not, we have to die, and I think many people. It should be recognised. It should be taught in schools. I think
As
from
well as
very
at home.
from young, and often people who are born in some sort of faith or some religious thing is often recognised. But for those who aren't, I think they should have something definitely in place. I mean, it has to go through some trauma first before it's recognised.
I think with death, nobody wants a member to die. Nobody. It happens. And when it happens, we have to find a way of going around it. So probably
would you go around it?
Probably the school. I can't see a parent unless there is someone who is not well in the family. That is when you start preparing the child that, this might happen.
I disagree with you.
But then,
So hang on, why do you disagree with that?
Why? Because I don't see how you can go around it and find a way to, it's something that is going to happen. And I think the earlier that nobody's going to escape it. As the child is born, death is partner with it. And I don't think that trying to find ways to go around it or approach it, I think it's something that should be taught as telling the tying shoelaces. How do you deal with conflict. These are things that should be part of life, that you teach your children as part of life, you know?
I quickly think it will be, well, it depends upon the individual. If you want me to, I mean, you wake up in the morning, so many things you want to talk to your kids about. And if you feel death is part of it, probably fine. I'm sure they watch TV, they do so many things, so they might have been picking this information. But if the school feel fine, we have so many of them in a professional way, let's introduce them to that. I think that is also fine.
I want to finally just ask you about going back to culture and how you think how important it is that an individual that's maybe has a religion or is part of a culture that has a specific group way of dealing with death should be allowed to deal with death in their own individual way. So if you're from a particular culture where this is how we deal with death, but that's not really conducive to how you want to deal with your grief, what can and what should that individual do? Because there must be lots of people in the world that have that kind of that conflict going on of this is how my family is saying we should deal with this, but that doesn't work for me.
Well, it's a bit challenging in that wise. Like we said, there's a lot of superstitious issues around death in certain culture. Some culture, like we say, could be just, oh, it has happened, let's go on with it. But in some culture, it's about you are going to meet this person again. So the person will be waking up in the future and you're going to meet again and this and that. So all those things come in. Now, if you have a culture, to me, the way I look at it is that probably there might be a standard that the whole world, one way or the other, will come to. Because we are more or less merging in a way. Some cultures are far behind, while some cultures are far more advanced.
In terms of dealing with
with these problems.
Okay.
The cultures that have challenges of probably the individual is so low, there's nothing they can do. The only way is to use the psychological type, which I mean, you'll be waking up again, your husband is gone, you can start life again, and so on. It works with them. Now, it then come back.
Briefly, because I've got to wrap up.
It comes back to where do you find yourself? Is it here or there? Yeah. You see, so where you find yourself determine exactly how the thing will be dealt with.
Kofi, Diane and Dr. Allen, thank you very much, all three of you joining me on which I think is a very important but obviously very sensitive discussion. If you haven't subscribed to our channel by now, please do so. Blakademik TV. We're across all the socials, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and of course check out our website blakademik.com. Until next week, peace.